Well, this is lecture 5 in the Yogasutras talk series. So, what I'll be discussing in this particular lecture is a planned structure to what is ahead. Then there is going to be a discussion on the world phenomenon and its engaging. Um, and after that, we'll take up the next sutra, which classifies the world DNA scan cycles into 5 different types of vrittis. The word vritti means uh, the scan cycles. One of the central aspects of yoga is developing that ability which allows one to directly understand reality. That process is called samyama in the Yoga Sutras, which involves both dynamic and focused meditation. In the Buddhist tradition, it is vipassana, which is analysis, perception, analytical perception, and together with the idea of samadhi. Samadhi is the focused meditation. Even in going beyond the universe is understood directly through this process, and then the world machine transcended. The source of understanding is not any particular text or something said by another individual, but what one understands directly. So, how to arrive at that state in which one can understand things directly is the core theme of the of studying the yogic process. The text of the Yoga Sutras as such do not seem to have an ordering that is meant to educate somebody who has no idea about the field. For instance, uh, terms related to samadhi, different types of samadhi are discussed in chapter 1, while the definition of samadhi, what samadhi is, does not occur until toward the end chapter. So it is obviously targeted at somebody who has already an understanding, a level of familiarity with these uh, terms. It makes little to no effort to uh, to give any detailed explanation, which is impossible because these are aphorisms in the first place. And neither is any effort made by the ordering of these aphorisms to bring a level of clarity to somebody who does not have any idea of the field. One might even wonder if it were done to intentionally hide things. It is difficult to say what the author had in mind. Perhaps the goal was just to preserve ideas. After all, the true knowledge of ideas is not a book, but the direct understanding, and certain concepts might have been obvious, known to almost everybody in an era. There might be, was it just hastily done? We do not know. Often, I find that people tend to glorify things just because they are ancient, um, or just because it is from antiquity. But anything can emerge from antiquity, things that are obviously uh, great and need to be preserved. Things such as the Vedic corpus, which definitely mm, a sound unveil things. Uh, and as regards the particular thing, that is the Yoga Sutras, um, there is the question that is it some kind of self-contained text anybody could pick up and use as a guide on the path? I doubt that is the case. It definitely condenses a few ideas, a particular body of knowledge that can enable people to walk the path that it describes once it is understood. Um, Condenses in the sense acts as pointers. This demands a broader discussion if we are to derive any worth from this particular text. Just a discussion of the sutra and its translation will not serve any purpose. So I plan to structure this particular set of lectures with that goal in mind. One of the central themes of discussion in the next few slides will be the form of the path and the form of the appeared world. Um, it is a false understanding that somehow immediately the awareness can be separated from the appeared world. Instead, one has to walk the path in terms of the forms of the appeared world. So there is going to be a discussion along the lines of the way that could be done, might be done. I should have said with that idea in mind that the text is limited in what it can do, what it can explain by virtue of a direct translation of it. So the world phenomena are these cycles of scan, the DNA vault vectors, and the DNA code itself being scanned out. So at this point, what this text does is it attempts a classification of the kinds of scan. A scan could be a direct view of something. A scan could be something experienced as a memory. It could be a dream. A scan could be in the in to mention one of the classifications of this particular text, a false perception. Remember, these classifications might not be ideal classifications. These are terminology from an era, apparently from an era where the uh, how do I put it, the depth of analysis this topic was subjected to, the structure of the world machine was subjected to, is limited. The knowledge of that, the expression of knowledge of that is limited in this particular text. There is a tendency to say whatever received writing is all that there is, it is the ultimate thing. If you look at the Bhagavad Gita, it warns of such a tendency. It's specifically in the beginning of chapter 2. In chapter 2, it says, um, Yamimam pushpidam vajam pravatanti vipaschita vedavadarata partha na anyatasti vadina. Meaning, they talk in all flowery words, engaging in scriptural ideas, saying this is all that exists and nothing else. Mm. And those people are described as avipaschita, meaning they do not have any direct perception. Um, at the moment, I'm taking up this idea through the framework of Yoga Sutras, but ideally, I would have loved to take it up from the idea of from the point of just mathematics and physics. But because I am just in the process of developing that view, that theory, I have um, decided to talk about it from the framework of Yoga Sutras, and also because people tend to be searching for what evolves the abilities of the awareness in these fields, and what is quote unquote reality in physics and mathematics. But physics is awareness driven. Once we understand the way The awareness holds reality, um, the mathematics of it, and the awareness dynamics of it. That is the physics of the world, which is non-distinct from the mathematics of the world as well. Even the formation of the number line is due to a mathematical collapse of a physical reality, which is the same collapse phenomenon we see when we observe a particle at a point. Neither such a point nor such a particle can exist unless the awareness has collapsed the dimensional structures in a downward scan down to the zeroth dimensional zero at that particular spatial configuration. There is no space as such. At that particular mathematical configuration, which would be interpreted as spatial configuration. I am not speaking of the whole idea that I have as of now because I would like to present it when my ideas are fuller. Again, if we are to be just blunt, picking up the Yoga Sutras and reading about the different types of vrittis, this does not add to anything. It does not lead to anybody's enlightenment. It does not lead to spiritual progress of anybody. We hardly see that. I have read the Yoga Sutras years before in terms of translation. How much did it add on a superficial read? I would say mm, not a lot. That would be an honest answer. I'm sure that is the case with the vast majority. People are afraid of questioning authority. But, uh, and not just that, it can lead to, just like every other tradition, it can lead to a whole set of nonsensical efforts. People trying to still their chittavritti, mind waves, this and that, all the talk on that. These are the five kinds of mind waves or chittavrittis, and I have to still my dreams, I have to still my direct perception, false perceptions, memories, this and that. It is not even possible. And that if somebody attempts that kind of effort uh, to begin with, it probably won't lead anywhere, and it very likely would lead to a kind of deranged effort, to say the least. So the question to begin with is not how to get rid of all these world scans, scan cycles. It is not possible. The earth will keep turning, the sun will keep turning, the moon will keep turning, the weather will keep changing, and people have to engage all that. So the question is how to engage this, how to engage these phenomena in a way that leads to the evolution of the soul inside, the thing inside, the soul experience, the awareness spark experiencing it. Again, the text itself offers pointers that what I said is the case. Sleep is nidra is said to be a kind of chittavritti. At the same time, the study of dreams is something that can lead to the state of yoga because the world phenomenon is being viewed just in the way the formation of a dream occurs. And there is a mystery to that. Once that process is understood, this process is also understood. Again, this is not to say the action does not have meaning. Nagarjuna says, even what one does in a dream affects oneself. Nagarjuna also says, those who understand the zero physics, 0 point physics, which is shunyada, understand right. But those who believe in it are lost. Nagarjuna apparently attributes that expression to the Buddha himself. add to what I just said, there is a whole bunch of nonsensical theories. That spirituality means going beyond the senses. And then there are a lot of people pretending to have gone beyond the senses, as if it were all a perpetual struggle with the senses. And this is amplified by the idea of what is religious, what is spiritual, and what is not. That we get bombarded uh, through the use of media. There's a lot of programming done on the human psyche. Uh, Both of these divisioned aspects, that is so-called real life and so-called spiritual life, has been designed so as to destroy humans. Religion means there is no reasoning. Mm, Reality means there is reasoning, which leads to the idea that there is nothing spiritual. Uh, so either you are a reasoning man, you're a man of science, or you're a man of spirituality, which means you're not a man of reasoning and science. So this is a kind of a dualistic nonsense that is put in people's brains. So from where did this field of logic arise? Research. Take Google and type in when did logic start, or just search Stoic logic. It is the exact system of logic, the system of propositions and all that we use today. It was developed by the Stoics for their spiritual progress. The Stoics were not mm, non-spiritual, atheistic people just trying to keep a Stoic attitude or anything. No, there was Stoic logic. It was a theistic philosophy. It um, was they had Stoic physics, which is largely lost. It speaks of um, ideas such as the wave function, in fact, something situated at the heart, perceiving uh, transformations, uh, and it was a complex field of inquiry, analysis, and so on. Logic had in parallel developed in India and is found in its whole form, um, with the idea of A implies B, or A implies B is the same as saying it's contrapositive, not B implies not A. These ideas are all found in Buddhist logic as well, and some more complex ideas of logic, which I would say emerges from entering into the hyperspace view. One might say it is raining, and one might say it is not raining. These are A and not A. But in a hyperspace view, both these phenomena can exist, A and not A. You can say a particle is at position A and position B, or its set of eigenstates are all at the same time existing and not existing. It is the idea of superpositioning. A true system of logic uh, takes that into consideration, the quantum view of logic. In the quantum view of logic, mm, 1 and 0 is true. A qubit, 1 and 0, something cannot be true and false in the usual logic sense. In the quantum logic sense, 1 and 0 is the state of a qubit, is the state um, of a particle. Say 1 and 0, say, assume we assign it to the direction of spin. When it is not measured, often it is the case that we have to think of it as 1 and 0. This superposition of the eigenstates of whatever the measured property um, is um, called the wave function. Of course, in our mathematics, because we start with the notion of an affine space, the idea of a wave function often becomes the space itself getting decomposed into these functions, which is in fact not that accurate an expression, because uh, the mathematical structure and its operators are what exists. These operations, that is why in quantum physics an operation is a set A set, a measurement is a set of mathematical operators because we are dealing with the world machine itself. Just as if one were to try the idea of stilling the brain waves, it would result in brain damage. If one were to disengage the senses, it would result in nervous system damage, nothing else. What else is it going to do? Beethoven's senses, both inner and outer, were kind of sharp. And Beethoven could we could say he traveled the path to a great degree. Otherwise, he would not be able to make that kind of music because he is perceiving on a higher plane, on a greater plane. In his last composition, it is said that he would sense the music by keeping, because he went deaf, he would sense the music by keeping his hands on the floor. Partly, he would have a strong inner sense of what the structures of music that emerges would be like. So the senses, Zen adepts speak of the senses turning sharper, brighter, richer. The world experience turns more beautiful, more soulful, because ultimately it's not the sense that feels anything. It is the soul, the perceiving entity inside that feels. So the sensory experience turns richer. The senses are not doing anything wrong. Only thing that the awareness cannot orderly process things or understand what the soul itself wants to do when the outward vectorial scans are held in perception. When it is entirely identified with the set of outward vectorial scans and assuming it is reality, devoid of the soul's natural reasoning state, the Greeks say reason resides in the soul, then is when the issue arises. If somebody were to watch an ad and say, and think buying 4 iPhones would make them happy, uh, that is an unreasoning state. The senses have nothing to do with that state. It is an absence of reasoning, which led to a state of psychological absurdity. What is not reasoning is absurd. In Goethe's maxims, they say, Goethe says, the senses do not deceive, it is the judgment that deceives. Further, if you think about it, the whole field of experimental physics, which is physics, physics is ultimately not theoretical, it is experimental. And physics based on observations of experiments, modeling and abstracting experimental data, discarding theory that does not align with experimental observation, can be used to build the world. Which means, to a great degree, the instrument that took in the world data, which is the set of senses the human has, is accurately dealing with phenomena. It is not somehow presenting a distorted view of anything in terms of world phenomena, in terms of the appearance of the world phenomena. No matter what fancy telescope or whatever one uses, ultimately, what is it that interprets? It is the faculty of the human. What interprets data? If somebody uses a telescope to see a star or a galaxy system, ultimately that data is interpreted in terms of the visual sense. If somebody is making Euclid is making his geometry, he is relying on his visual perception to form even the fundamental axioms. Even when the idea in mathematics is formed, say fundamental ideas, there is a great deal of drawing upon world experience. Nobody is going to make a mathematics in which 1 plus 1 is I do not know what that string. We might try to formalize it to a greater degree, saying one is modeled by a set things like that. Of course, in a true mathematics, uh, one is modeling based on the structure of the world machine itself. But what I'm driving at is that sensory input is not uh, something wrong. Again, if one is to make a theory of how the universe works based on a direct understanding of the world machine, how do you measure the theory? Through experiment itself. Right? Everything is strung on a zero axis, and there should be some evidence of that. Right? The phenomenon separates into this particular. I do not want to put the physics out there. That is why I'm holding back. A phenomenon has a spin separation. And when the spin is not separated, it can, when it is, say, suppose purely spin in time, when the things hyperbundled are purely separated in time, assume, then the rates of spin can appear as the same, which is one reason why I believe the galaxy spin rates are seen as the same. Why do all galaxies have a black hole at the center? It is again that 0 point, which is a higher order zero than, say, the zero that one would associate with the Earth center. So its mathematics is different, which is why the gravity phenomenon acts differently in holding a galaxy together. And they are at a loss how to explain it. So they introduce ideas of dark energy, dark matter, and all that, which essentially means some kind of energy that we cannot see, some kind of matter that we do not see. In fact, our theories of gravity cannot explain a lot of things, including why the galaxies seem to rotate as a solid disk. We have to assume like 90% of matter is invisible somehow, and we do not know what that matter is. So they gave it the label dark matter. And there are galaxies seen receding faster than light. How would light reach that? The Hubble law says the farther the galaxy, the faster it recedes in a linear sense, in a linear relationship. Uh, that is, the velocity at which it recedes is proportional to how far it is, and the speed at which it moves away can be faster than light. How then would it reach it? Then they say space itself is expanding. Then that is a vague usage of the word space. What is going on is that is movement of higher order zeros. That movement is not occurring in uh, the transformation domain of the 0 points that we generally associate here. And the constancy of a projected spin axis is what appears as the speed of constancy of rotation of a projected spin axis of a particular plane is what appears as the constancy of the speed of light. With what I speak of is the world machine view. When in interpretation, we get data from it sensorially, such as the speed of light seems to be uniform in a local vacuum space and things of the sort. Neither of these perceptions are inaccurate in themselves. So unless one trusts one's own senses, one cannot begin to deal with reality. If you look at ancient medicinal systems, their way of understanding the properties of a plant were the sensory input, because it had meaning. Its meaning or sensorial sense is not different from the way it affects the psyche, which is not different from the way in which it affects uh, the body, because the psyche and the body one function. The doctrine of signatures of Paracelsus says the form of the plant, even the visual form of the plant, is a guide to what properties it has. Like they have found in the lab, the plant uh, Brahmi uh, is good for the brain. It is shaped like the shape of the leaf is like a brain lobe. And that doctrine of signatures uh, is not just mere coincidence. It is found in different traditions. That is what I wanted to say. Ginseng is thought to be a whole body tonic. Why? Because the root has the form of a man, and that is Chinese medicine. Again, the faculty that they used more, both in Chinese and Indian medicine, is the um, taste of the herb. Not just the taste. The taste leads to a sensation of the impact on the whole body, and the minuscule movements within the system that is perceived by sampling a minuscule portion of the herb speaks when analyzed in perception of all the properties of the herb. So they would introduce, based on the sensory perception, classifications of the herbs. So in Ayurveda, the classifications are based on rasas. Rasa means the kind of um, taste perception, and taste and perception in the sense. So the senses uh, are not the problem at all, right? There is no authentic tradition that says senses are a problem. If you look at the lives of those mythological characters, they are, of course, actively engaging the world. Mahabharata, and say the Greek legends. The forces that are at play to control individuals starts by making them unsure of themselves, starts by driving them into false and greedy ideals, then tells them that that is their normal and natural state, and that is the way they function. And these false ideas lead to a conflict within oneself. One, if you do not trust yourself, then there is no way that you can engage rational behavior. And once this tussle sets in, people think they are in some kind of spiritual struggle and they are happy with themselves. The more they find themselves ridiculous, the more they trust the person saying, uh, asking them not to trust themselves. Which is why these organizations grow upon mankind and then subdue them, control them, act as use them for their purpose, use the people for their purposes, use their foolishness as a source of power, and so on. Even extreme ascetic mortification, that which harms the body, effort made with um, bodily discomforts, and that is said to be in the mode of darkness in the Bhagavad Gita itself. The, the goal of yoga is to seek to bind oneself to the Christic planes, to the soul planes, which is a source of joy. Right? And that process does not benefit from extremes of sensory deprivation or anything like that. Even if you look at spiritual effort, all of them, be it Zen or be it mountaintop monasteries, they keep an aesthetic environment. It is normal to burn incense. The Carthusia perfume line was made by monks. Okay, so this is from the Tao Te Ching. It says when the Tao is lost, the principle of virtue arises. When the principle of virtue is lost, the idea of goodness arises. When goodness is lost, then the principle of righteousness arises. When righteousness is lost, then the formal principles of action and ritual arise. It's been a while since I have tried to read Chinese, but I'll try to read the Chinese. Gu shi dao er ho de. Shi de ho ho ren. Shi ren ho yi. Shi yi ho li. It says when Dao is lost, then there is virtue. In fact, it can be understood differently. In one sense, when one's that direct soul sense in which one is acting spontaneously, naturally and without blemish, mm, that sense is lost, assume. Then one can lean into the principle of virtue. And only when that sense is lost, need thoughts of what is virtuous and what is not arise. When that is lost in the principle of virtue, you can guide back into that stage. Perhaps not entirely, but can push toward the ideal stage. And when that principle of virtue is lost, then the talk of goodness arises. This action is good, that action is not good. These are the set of um, ideas to follow uh, in terms of what is good and what is not. When the principle of goodness is lost, the principle of righteousness arises, which has more of a sense of enforcing what is right and so on. And an innate sense of what is righteous. Um, Somebody can influence the world in a profoundly good way, or one can influence it through the principle of righteous action. When the sense of righteousness is also gone, innate sense is gone, then what remains is uh, then what one can do is follow the principles of ritual. Of course, in every state, the state of Tao also, the principles of ritual are innate. It is not that the outward alone, outward needs focus on. The principle of ritual is innate. Even in nature, the animals that evolve, we find, take up very similar rituals uh, to what humans take up. Wolves have a kingdom family ritual. This translation is not that accurate. Um, it is by Archie J. Baum, 1958, but uh, but attempts to verbalize things in more detail than what the original does, and therefore goes away from the Tao of it. Anyway, I'll just read it. When nature's spontaneous activity disappears, then intelligent action is called for. That is not what it says. Virtue. When intelligent action is unavailable, intuitive generosity may be appeared to. Anyway, I'll skip that because it is anyway not accurate. But where law is enforced, spontaneous and sincere loyalty declines, and disintegration of harmonious society sets in. Thus, valuing law as an end in itself results in minimizing fidelity to nature itself. This idea is important because that is the fall of a lot of religious effort. They fall into the paper and the letter way too much in deciding what to do and what not to do, which should arise from the soul, which is why the Christian effort was different from a different era. And it is explicitly said in the Bible, which is a product of a great amount of editing, so as to appeal to the clergy of a time. Um, and it says the letter kills, it is the spirit that gives life. And in that section, mm, They, are, they say, we are not like Moses. It speaks of the ministry of death written on stone. That section where the phrase, the letter kills, spirit gives, life arises. I think that phrase occurs in more than one section, but one of those sections, you can just look it up. It's not that difficult to find in the Bible. So the innate sense, when it is present in its ideal state, naturally guides the world phenomena engaging. It is not like we are presented with a false theory of evolution and all that. There is very little evidence that humanity went from a state of primitive ethics, aesthetics, architecture, art to a very complex state. Whatever aesthetics, art the ancients have presented to us, we are aspiring towards it still now. Like the Greek art and architecture and their aesthetics, their philosophy has been guiding Western civilization. And it still acts as the beacon. We will get into it in another lecture. There are different possible timelines. There is a principle of quantum retrocausality. I think John Wheeler recently said he has just about enough time to work on, I'm not sure if it was Wheeler or Roger Penrose, just about time to work on the idea that action alters not just the future but also the past. The past view changes. There is nothing in quantum physics that says the quantum state alteration should affect only the future. Right? The past view also alters. So there is no such thing as a fixed past, just as there is no such thing as a fixed future. If the human level of awareness falls, we'll see a past that fits into where this particular node in time is. Just assume a string on a sphere. If you push the string up or down, it has to move in sections both forward and behind. It has to alter. Assume that is through time. In fact, if you exit into hyperspace, what one sees is nodes and what is hazy in view. The hyperspace, a particular hyperspace of view of Earth is like nodes in time. It is hazy because it is as if the mathematics demands the collapse can occur only at those nodal points. And it is not linear in one dimension, but its distribution is because the spatial scan here is three-dimensional, the temporal scan is also three-dimensional. For we cannot move in space. Space is a configuration. A configuration cannot move by itself. The directionalities of movement are directionalities of scan in time. In force space, time is four-dimensional. Three space collapses from four space. So the point is there are different pasts, there are different futures. This is futures. This idea is also found in Indian mythology. Like the Ramayana itself says there has been a million different Ramayanas, each story a little bit different. A particular version of Ramayana says that. Ramayana is one of the oldest Indian legends. And I do not believe the most widely accepted version of Ramayana is the true one, because there are a lot of inconsistencies. A more clear description of the Pushpaka Vimana occurs in another version of Ramayana. There are over 800 versions, and in that version, the use of a force field and the Vimana moving a place as a whole to another place, and all those things appear. Those ideas are difficult for a primitive imagination to arrive at. And not just that, it is not just the fiction piece that is there. There is a whole deal of philosophy, a high level of poetry, complex civilizations described, and so on. In Ramayana, in Mahabharata, the same. And what we might have received down the line would have been filtered through a series of timeline flips, a series of filtrations through the psyche of different eras, because it were handed down orally, it seems, at least in this timeline. It were uh, written down just a few thousand years ago first. While it is widely accepted in India that it dates to at least 3 or 4 thousand years before. So traditions have pondered this idea in depth. The temple that is to be taken care of, uh, or where the knowledge appears, where the light appears, is ultimately the human form itself, own human form of the person making the adept, of the adept making the effort. Um, and the temples that we see outside um, were initially supposed to be a map of that, a reminder towards the inner geometries where the strings appear, and by perhaps by analogy of form to be held by awareness fields in ritual and all that. The Great Pyramid would have played such a purpose, um, aligning with the geometry, inner geometries of the human, and perhaps uh, generating timeline shifts and so on. That is why there was chambers inside for, say, the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and so on, where the king had to be spiritually advanced, and holding that thing, he could nudge the world phenomenon in time. Um, that might have been, see, the purpose of ritual was also practical often. I won't get into details. I remember seeing an image of an ancient Indian temple attributed to Pandavas, who are the heroes of Mahabharata, in Kashmir or somewhere. Somebody had posted it on social media while I was kind of active on social media. I mean just Facebook and friends. Um, and it had the structure of a human form, very similar to this temple of man thing, the temple in man thing, the Luxor temple that is described here. It was not some very famous temple, but rather remote temple, and unfortunately, um, I forgot to save the image. Now I cannot find which temple, nor do I have the image, but I have a very clear memory, and hopefully it is not a false memory, because a lot of memories can be false, but hopefully this one is not. Again, if you look at um, the field of common talk of spirituality, Indian spirituality speaks of somehow restraining the indriyas and all that. The word indriya meant um, only a particular strength, like intelligence. Indriyas get translated to the word senses, and then they pretend as if the senses have to be somehow subdued and this and that. In the Indra principle is adored in the Vedic literature. Like a phrase says, Indram pradarhavamahe, Indram prayatyadvare, Indram somasya pitai. meaning I invite Indra down into the uh, ritual for the drinking of uh, the spiritual drink. If you look at the Buddhist literature, the mm, uh, term Indriya refers to intelligence, spiritual energies, wisdom, and even the final state of samadhi is a force that is wielded by the awareness. Any force that is wielded by the awareness is an Indriya. The ability of the awareness to wield these forces gets falsely translated as restraining, and then the idea of restraining boils down to some idea of a tussle and so on. I took this particular sentence from Wisdom Lip. It says, Buddhindriya refers to the cognitive senses according to the Amanaska Yoga treatise, which deals absorption, yogic powers, and liberation, which deals with probably. It is a whole function that is formed in this so-called yoga process. Uh, mm, the integration as it should be integrated. But the awareness is so far lost down into the world without a yoking into oneself. Then one might say one is in a vague way lost in the sensorial perception and all that, which is obviously a weak state. Right? So getting lost in what is continually transforming. It is like finding no point to stand on, because there is the sensorial world is continuously under transformation. So there is no inner yoking. There is no point to establish oneself in. When one is established, the senses are playing its full role. It is not as if the rider itself is getting dragged on the earth by the horses. In fact, this idea of restraining the world sense and all that leads to ideas of mortification, which is entirely going in the opposite direction. The Buddhists also think of mortification and all that as wrong. The Buddhist meditation is leading into a very intense state of pleasure. You can read the descriptions of the four formless jhanas. Leading to, in the ninth state, the pleasure is described as untranscendable. In the first state itself, it is a very intense form of joy. And the second stage, it becomes a finer kind of rapture, and so on. So, and in each of the stages, it is advised that the body be kept merged with it, merge the body with it. So, it is only a greater sense of pleasure that has led to the so-called withdrawal. The sensory pleasures were a view into that pleasure itself, albeit a narrower view. So, it is not, the idea of a mortification is absent, if you understand what I'm saying. It is the idea of being situated, anchored into the pleasure of what is in the depths. In fact, anything that brings a sense of unease is the soul going away from the soul. Or you can say that it's the soul. Um, what I meant to say is anything that brings a sense of unease to the soul is going away from the soul. That if you have an unease on your soul, uh, the soul is at unease. Right? There is some reason. And then the yoga process is gone. The unease arises from identifying with the world scan vectors too much, because it is altering. Notification is also an identification with the world scan vectors. So is uh, an artificial kind of attempted restraint. It is not arising from a direct perception or a state of an absolute view or a view of the crystic planes which are absolute pleasure or anything. The Zen state, the world experience is richer because it is not the outer physics that feels the world, but the inner soul. And the sensory input thus is felt richer because the world, because the experiencing entity has aligned itself to the soul or the crystic planes or whatever, wherever that uh, meaning sense of the physics arises. In fact, I am going to stop pretending to be normal and say there are alien races on Earth. And it is possible to see that if you research it a bit, that drive the systems of knowledge that are out there in public, that are programming people through what we think is normal media, whose efforts at controlling the human race is the narrow set of technology that is being put out there, which does not involve um, authentic space travel of humans. It does not involve uh, anything, zero inertia crafts or anything of the sorts. We do not have anything that can lead to a vibrant humanity. What is there is AI, DNA editing, and they're trying to bring out implants and plugging humans into a kind of virtual reality and using humans for a particular energetic purpose. The Earth is being invaded. A lot of planets have fallen like that, in fact. And they run the agenda across centuries because it is essentially the takeover of a planet. You, it is not when people search for aliens, they imagine there is only one dimension. No, there are many physical dimensions. So UFOs, there have been papers published saying these anomalous vehicles exhibit impossible accelerations. In fact, they are not accelerating. They are exiting into hyperspace and re-entering at another configuration in the same time, virtually the same time. So for one, many of these races can go in and out of this dimension. There might be alien races who cannot directly access this dimension. There might be races uh, in whose interests it is to hide their identity. Okay. If you, why I said this is that now there is a fundamental education that is being given to people that says a spiritual person does not have reasoning. A spiritual person is not strong. A spiritual person does not eat good food. A spiritual person uh, does not have fun. A spiritual person does not have a whole life. Uh, so they that is programming, right? And then they introduce an idea of reality in which there is no spirituality. The real person is having fun all the time, partying all the time, um, having eating whatever they want to eat. Well, this is just a figment of imagination. Nobody can eat whatever they want to eat. The health will fail after some time. And nobody can live like that, not even people who are billionaires. They do not live partying all the time. Spirituality was the domain of kings, philosophers, scientists, um, and all that. If you even in recent times, You wouldn't say Socrates, Plato, Dante, Shakespeare, Beethoven, all these people were devoid of reasoning. You wouldn't say they were weak people. You wouldn't say Hercules was not strong. You wouldn't say all those warriors described in mythology were all weak people, because all of them were spiritual ideals. And there has been a lot of editing to not just mythology, human systems of knowledge, and so on. Even when it is um obvious that things were one way, you will find our encyclopedias, the public view, and all engineered in such a way that the public thinks the opposite. Like if you search Epicureanism, they would say Epicureanism is a form of hedonism. Uh, it was virtually a form of asceticism if you just read the Epicurean writings. Mm, I'll just quote Epicurus, a few quotes, which is important to understanding this path and important to understanding the process of achieving yoga, the path of achieving yoga. It says it is impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely and honorably and justly. And it is impossible to live wisely and honorably and justly without living pleasantly. Um, this is like a topological map of a space to another. If both the spaces are connected, there is something that goes both ways. Um, or like uh, um, these two things are like a flow between two spaces. That is what I wanted to say. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, "Evam pravartitam chakram na anuvartati." Dot dot. Essentially, who lives here weighed down. Aghayur indriyaramo is the phrase used. Aghayur indriyaramo means agh means weighed down, to solidify it down. Indriyaramo means the strengths uh, not used. For what purpose? It is said in the previous two lines, the wheel of the universe that turns, who does not turn here, living with the indriyas ignored, or uh, and and as an individual weighed down, such an individual lives in delusion. That is what the Gita says. The Gita is not advising Arjuna to go and take up an ascetic life. It, the Gita is advising Arjuna to take up the royal ritual. Literally, take up the royal ritual. That is what it says. Just as your forefathers have done that, do so. And the royal ritual is not one of dullness. It is even mandatory for the emperor to engage that pleasant ritual, even during the most dire circumstances. Like in the Mahabharata war, Abhimanyu dies. Abhimanyu is like a son to Yudhishthira. Abhimanyu is Arjuna's son. Yudhishthira and Arjuna are brothers. Um, so the next, so Yudhishthira laments that incident terribly. But the next day, before going to war, uh, Yudhishthira is described as being bathed in um, water laden with all kinds of fancy fragrances and all that. That ritual continues, and the ritual is not undertaken for oneself. It is undertaken for the purpose of holding up the world. If the king's ritual weakens, it is the world phenomenon around him that falls. It is the human awareness that structures the world. A king's awareness is one in which um, the world phenomenon is acted on more powerfully. The idea of the crown emerges from the fact that the crown chakra is visible in an authentic king. again, that it was a purely spiritual idea. It says, there are texts that say in ancient days, uh, the kings were not identified by their jewels, outward jewels, or the crowns that were put on them, but their authentic divine crowns were visible. And often they wielded superhuman strengths as well. We find that in the legends. People were not making up random stories. Otherwise, why would a person be selected to be a king? Why would people agree to serve? At the point that thing fell, that idea of a king was more spiritually advanced and therefore could guide that world. It exists in several planets, on several worlds, in parallel dimensions on Earth, and so on. But on Earth, it fell to a kind of reptilian royalty, a mixed blood royalty with an alien species who ruled by cruelty. Um, their own history says they were self-admittedly cannibalistic. Um, there are a particular son, nobility woman in England. Over 800 dead bodies were found near her castle because she was feeding on the blood uh, and using the blood. So that is the fake royalty. There might have been an alien invasion. There might have been timeline flips, because otherwise, how were those grand cities like 11th century Paris built without any electricity, without any technology? And there is a whole layer underneath Paris, a whole layer of city underneath Paris. How was that built? So a theory goes that mud floods were engineered. There were timeline flips, and the low timeline has to be maintained through a false education by hiding authentic theories. And the way a royal ritual gets held up is the sensory input and output. Assume a kingdom where the greeting is like in the scary movie, "What's up?" Then it won't be a kingdom ritual, and the kingdom cannot exist. So the offering of proper meaning, of proper words, uh, is what structures the kingdom. A royal palace in poverty is no kingdom. The same thing applies to the inner kingdom and the human body. When, when in normal life, spiritual effort is not different in form from normal life. The king does not go anywhere else to become spiritual. If a king, likewise, the individual does not do anything different from what is the norm of existence to become spiritual. Beethoven does not go up into a monastery or anywhere to evolve himself, but does what he's meant to do. Only in certain strange circumstances, when the world does not allow the space for study, the time for study, and all that, people have taken up efforts leaving the world behind, hermetic efforts sealing themselves away, and that is normal. Even Goethe used to spend a lot of time in almost a hermetic way, keeping the world outside. That is normal. Even scientists do that. Everybody does that. Artists do that. That is for a purpose, uh, for study, for engaging the endeavor itself in a more intense way. Epicurus quotes again, "Let no one delay to study philosophy while he is young, and when he is old, let him not become weary of the study. For no man can ever find the time unsuitable or too late to study the health of his soul." Epicurus again, "He who is not satisfied with a little is satisfied with nothing. Self-sufficiency is the greatest of wealth." This is not a hedonist. Well, Epicurus were a sage. This is quoted from a website. Epicurus, speaking of pleasures, leads us to the picture leads us to picture an Epicurean as a hedonist who loves high living. We imagine him to be someone who is overly indulgent in exotic foods, drinks excessively, and is hooked on sensual pleasures. But that is not at all true for those who follow Epicureanism. What Epicurus taught about pleasures was subtle and thoughtful, in contrast to popular belief that his philosophy stands for excess and debauchery. In fact, the ancient Epicureans enjoyed eating simple meals. Epicurus, who lived mainly on bread and olives, once wrote to a friend, "Send me a small pot of cheese so that I may be able to indulge myself whenever I wish." This thing, making a feast out of a tiny pot of cheese, is a form of alchemy. And it is the inner spiritual force that enables that. I write in this slide that the soulful joy is an alchemized joy. Epicurus were able to make a feast out of a tiny pot of possibly cottage milk cheese. Doesn't mean anything, but what I'm saying is uh, it is not possible for the average awareness to make a feast out of a few spoonfuls of cheese or a few slices of cheese. But for the evolved soul, just as it is possible to turn water into wine, it is possible to evolve. Uh, Water to wine is also an energy transformation symbol, an expression of energy transformations. It is possible to evolve joys from what seems simple. It is amplified by the clarity of the soul, because the pleasure exists not in the outward thing, it exists in the soul. So the outward thing is used to amplify the view of the soul. It was Beethoven who said something like, only a good soul can make a good soul, or enjoy a good soul for that matter. That is something I added. And as the relationship runs both ways, a good soup can amplify the perception of the good soul. You can work out the logic yourself. The Bhagavad Gita in verse 3, chapter 6 says, Aririksho Munir Yogam Karma Karanam Uchyate. Yoga Rudasya Tasyeva Shama Karanam Uchyate. It means um, for a person desiring to ascend to the state of yoga, action is the principle. And who has already ascended to that stage of yoga, tranquility is the principle of progress. Shama. And the principles needed in different stages of work and the forms needed are different. What is taught to those who are taken up the monastic path, monks, it is entirely different from the principles that are applicable to those who are on a different stage or on a different form of the path. The principles of taught to a monk cannot be imitated in society, or nor can it be used to structure early efforts. In Zen, we find uh, that Zen was practiced by a lot of warriors, and a lot of them achieved enlightenment, which is not very typical of uh, perceived values um, of a person on a meditative path, as in what the public might tend to think. If you look at Templar Knights, of course they were on a spiritual path. Zen is very blunt about it. Zen does not hesitate to use phrases like in the practice of archery, which is a spiritual practice as well. One shot, one kill, or that one has not approached one's inner ideal state unless one cannot destroy the world where one stands. Phrases along the lines are found in the Blue Cliff records as well. not in the exact form that I said now. In the chapter that describes meditation, that is sitting down and meditating, even in that chapter of the Gita, of the Bhagavad Gita, the requirement goes, um, this particular phrase appears, um, Yuktahara viharasya, yukta cheshtasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Of those who are enjoined in ahara. Ahara literally means food. It, in the broader sense, also means world joys. And vihara. Vihara means celebration, something grander. And and enjoined in games and action, enjoined in dream and awakening, yoga becomes the destroyer of suffering. Yukta ahara viharasya. Asya is a genitive ending. So of those who are enjoined in. The lives of those in mythology. And remember, virtually all of them were evolving in their own way, um, were normal. It is not based on sensory deprivation or anything of those sorts. Of course, when they take up grander endeavors, they are not going to be bothered by trivial pleasures. And that is normal. Like Arjuna was meditating on, Arjuna goes to meditate for the Pashupatashtra in the Himalayas. And he is offered a stay in Indraloka, which is a heavenly world. Arjuna says he is not that enamored by all that. And he finds pleasure in that ascetic endeavor. It is not ascetic in the sense the goal was to evolve his strengths, the goal was to gain those weapons needed for war, and that ostensibly outward goal is in fact acting as a fuel for the goal, for the process of achieving perfection. The word for attachment in Buddhism literally means fuel. It means upadana. Upa means underneath, dana means that which grants. That, that which grants energy to the uh, process. If you look at the Vedic rituals, the outward form of the ritual, which is supposed to imitate the inner form of the endeavor and the world form as well. They keep offering butter to the fire. With an understanding of how these dimensions form, it is possible to keep structuring own body with even without any external food. There has been a lot of research on that. It has been recorded on live camera. There was this person meditating under a tree in Nepal in public view for like 6 months. A camera crew recorded it without breaking the footage for like 48 hours or so, which is difficult to survive, uh, which is a phase of time that is difficult to go through without water and all that. Um, and there was a person who was observed for days, several days, in a hospital setting, a particular uh, monk or yogi like individual. And he was not, it was observed that he did not take any food, and he was given daily a little bit of water just to wash his mouth. Other than that, there was nothing. There are adepts who speak of living on sunlight and all that, uh, which is possible, which are states that arise in certain kinds of spiritual efforts, states that more naturally arise in certain kinds of spiritual efforts, like repeated study of the Gayatri Mantra can lead to that state in which one can survive on sunlight alone. If you look at fairy tales, mythology, and things of the sorts, they are speaking of ideal forms. And people inherently aspire for the ideal. They know what is ideal, which is why fairy tales uh, become something that kids listen to, because it is innately there. It is only sparking an innate sense. If the sense that it is an ideal did not exist inside, the outward story cannot spark that. Or the heroic ideals, the ideals of the warrior. All these things have been distorted by the visual media of today. A warrior is not some kind of always frenzied, always angry, some kind of a brute, substanceless brute kind of person. A warrior is able to wield a grand amount of strength, a lot of which are beyond uh, the average, uh, the warrior, the mythological warrior, the average human. In the mythology, the warrior is also a spiritual warrior. What is presented on TV is modeled in the movies and all, is modeled after the psychopath, the murderer, uh, that kind of attitude. Uh, Even in the facial expressions, even in the antisocial attitudes that are encouraged, in the perpetually antisocial uh, uh, coldness, all those things that are encouraged, a very superficial kind of coldness, all those things are encouraged in Hollywood and by extension the entertainment industry world over, because that it is the Hollywood that drives all those things. Hollywood becomes the holy grail of entertainment, and the so-called attitudes that the heroes and uh, everybody, heroes and heroines and everybody displays is based on really psychopathic personalities. And if it is imitated blindly, it leads to narcissistic personality disorders and all that. Uh, we find a rising number of narcissistic personality disorder cases where people do not have emotions of depth. People manipulate each other. People find worth only in the supermarket object. People find more worth in their career than their family. And the families, in turn, impose that ideal on the next generation as a form of self-protection, which leads to a dead society. It, it serves the machine that is falling into place, that is destroying humanity, where everybody is thought to be so-called strong, independent, while the reality is everybody is living off the supermarket and getting progressively weakened, fed by sugars, fed by really stupid media, chained down by uh, all kinds of things designed to destroy humanity. The movie programming, what I was discussing, I said it leads to the narcissistic personality disorder thing and other psychological disorders and forms of depression. Um, why that occurs is because certain modes of the brain's functioning, which is not natural to the brain, are activated, and then that state is kept perpetually, which leads to actual physical brain damage. A psychopath's brain is damaged in the physical sense. False spirituality that is put out there by false theories engineered to do similar damage does the same thing. It ends up giving people brain damage. We find people who subscribe to all those false theories finally ending up without reasoning, not open to reason, not open to anything of logic, depth, nothing but for them to believe that lies, that those set of lies requires them to discard reasoning of all forms. And what is not reasoning is said to be of the mode of tamas in Indian traditions, darkness. dullness. And the brain naturally transforms. An unreasoning brain is not a useful thing, and it of course atrophies. That is a real real danger. The idea that belief is something devoid of reason was again programmed into people's brains. The idea of faith is not saying, I'll believe what somebody else says. So many people are saying this, or on stage they are saying that, so I'll believe this, or I had a little bit of an unexplained experience, so I'll believe it. Then people might, a lesser developed, um, a less technological civilization might choose to believe another race if they have cell phones or a higher technology, or if they can work some wonders. That is not the idea. The idea of belief is entirely different, and it means that you believe your faculties, you believe your ability to achieve those faculties, or rather, the Buddhists speak of that there are two modes of knowledge. One is the sensory, and and the second is what appears inside. Both of these are valid means of knowledge, and the only two valid means of knowledge. For instance, in the theory of Dharma Kirti, the Buddhist scholar Dharma Kirti, several centuries ago, this was uh, these two were the two modes of knowledge input, as per knowledge, knowing, as per Dharma Kirti. So that requires a level of faith. If when somebody is progressing spiritually, evolving, he could be told that what he sees or understands, perceives, the knowledge that he feels inside his own gut feeling, even, all those things are not to be trusted. What is to be trusted is a few people upon the stage, the, or medical industry or academia. That is the absence of faith, right, in what is perceived, because the divinity uh, of the perceiving entity and the plane from which the perceiving entity has emerged is the divinity that one is to have faith in. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says last chapter, unto that God situated in the heart of all beings, unto that God alone resort. That is, unto that being situated in own heart alone resort. That being is not the individual soul. It is, the Upanishad says there are two. One is strong, one is weak, um, referring to the individual soul and the uh, God Himself. And it is not that one transforms into something else. Those are all things. What the objective way things are is viewed in the spiritual process, and the false views are unsubscribed from. And there are also theories that say um, everything is all one entity, and that is wrong, entirely wrong. Because if everything were one entity, then uh, uh, if I knew something, I wouldn't need to make a set of lectures. There would be no difference between uh, making a set of lectures, not making a set of lectures, somebody else understanding something, somebody else listening or not listening. Even though in the world phenomenon, the world phenomenon is continually transforming, and from instant to instant, um, the instance view, the instant apostrophe S view is different, not only of the world, but also of the body that we perceive as the quote unquote the self. Uh, that does not mean there is an individual awareness. That does not mean that there is no individual awareness spark. The individual awareness spark is not this transforming world scan, nor the DNA pocket in which it is situated, which is the perception of the own body form. So there are different types of scan: temporal scan, spatial scan. The DNA evolution is a particular of own body, is a particular kind of DNA scan and different from observing the world, different in a sense from observing um, world vectors of world vectors in the spatial sense, which is why the Yoga Sutra classification of vritis need not be the only scientifically possible classification of the kinds of vritis. Again, what I want to say that when studying these fields, remember that there is an agenda at work in the world, an agenda that teaches right from childhood that the purpose of reality, quote unquote, is zombie work, designing AI editing things, sorry, DNA editing things, essentially to displace humankind for a more alien civilization, which might take over human forms even. There are different technologies that can enable them to do that, and there are technologies that can alter disguise forms. It acts by, it is kind of fanciful when you speak um, about it in terms of earth physics. But what happens is there's something the aliens call the identity wave. It is the identity wave that grants us, just in sense of the wave function. It is the collapse of the identity wave onto another layer of reality that grants us the sense of our own form. If the identity wave is edited, it is possible to technologically alter form. A human function can be added to the identity wave, and we'll uh, see another species in a human form, because there is no difference from what the awareness holds and what is. Uh, the observation flips. With some of the alien civilizations, they have even suits which kids used to uh, play games by altering identities. The suit will give access to a database which will grant the person inside both the experience of being assume even an ant form, uh, things like that, any form, um, and the form is outwardly observed form also alters, kind of. And there is even something, another kind of game uh, called they call it the form matrix, found in some uh, even alien UFOs, hyperspace stations, and all that. It works like this. Sometimes we say, I feel like a bird. I feel as free as a bird, or I feel as strong as a lion. What is happening is those DNA maps or functions, that is the bird experience, exists in the being DNA code of the individual. That map is getting activated. And then we are saying, we might put our hands to either side and say, I feel as free as a bird. Our appearance is also transforming in that moment. Just like when we are distressed, our appearance transforms. Because that form granting wave function and the set of DNA vectors scanned is altering. If that pocket, that potential pocket of DNA scan is were to be amplified, and the form, this trivial transformation of form that occurs were to be amplified, there will be an alteration of form itself. Based on this, there are game spaces within UFOs You cannot call it virtual reality because the form itself is changing. The experience becomes that. Like if you're like with some aquatic aliens, there is a game in which you might get a little angry and you'll become a swordfish. Extremely angry, you'll be like a shark. But angry and defensive, a hammerhead shark, or angry and trying to defend, hide, something like a telescopic eye fish shark, because all these are organism forms on Earth or different planets are like DNA pockets of the Earth and thus thought functions of the Earth organism. Schindler wrote that the universe is a thought of God. So is every form appearing. Uh, but layered across these 0 points, across different dimensions and different awarenesses. Um, yeah, this particular game. Uh, and I wanted to describe something more. Uh, and not just that. In other worlds, there are parallel dimensions, different worlds, oceanic humanities. Um, the flipping of form is a normal phenomenon. That is, assume in the act of love. When the final stage is approached, they can flip into the forms of dolphins, whales of that world. And that particular state, 0 point state, abides for an hour or two, like floating through the sunset or deep underneath the ocean. An extremely beautiful state. Mm, Again, that's particular species of humans that I'm talking about. They tend to flip their form continually in the act of love. It need not be this very grand dolphin whale form. Depending upon the nature of the act of love, it can be anything. But that intense emotional state is when they tend to alter forms really fast. They have an oceanic form, they have an land form. In the oceanic form, they have invisible gills on the forearm, sides of the neck. Uh, the communication occurs in different ways, including telepathy and exchange of saliva. The saliva gets teleported. The physics of that world is slightly different. The awareness is continually, whichever world, every act of observation is a kind of uh, a state abruptly appearing in the quantum physics sense. So it is a kind of um, teleportation from a state to another of the world of experience. In the physics of that space and the state in which the awareness is bound to the DNA pockets of that world, it is thus that the awareness is able to teleport things in own domain. Uh, the teleportation, if you see fish, they tend to exchange, like goldfish in an aquarium, it might seem that they are exchanging saliva. It is a form of communication actually. The saliva is murky, it means the inner thoughts, emotions are murky. If it is clear, the thoughts are sublime. And in those worlds, um, Chomsky actually described grammar as hardwired in the brain. In fact, it is not just grammar, language is hardwired in the world DNA. English occurs in different worlds. The Vedas are said to exist in across worlds in this galaxy, exist in across worlds in different in this galaxy across different worlds. Sanskrit exists in different worlds. Mm. So the way communication occurs, a lot of abductees say the aliens communicated to them by telepathy. That is not something fanciful for them, nor is it using any kind of technology. That is a normal mode of existence. There, sometimes animals seem to understand. Anybody who has a pet knows dogs understand human language a lot. What might be happening is the dog is not understanding English. The very vibration of our thought goes into the dog's brain, and there it appears in its own language. That is how exactly telepathy works too. If a gray aliens are not really good aliens. They are not. A lot of alien species are just humans, somewhat slightly different humans. Greys are not humans. They are thought to engage in a lot of genetic manipulation and all those stuff. But even when a gray interacts, the other person gets the thought in English or own native language usually, because that thought form is brought into language form in own brain. That wave form is brought into language form in own brain. That is exactly how telepathy works. And it occurs in those worlds between human and non-human species. Like a goldfish might say, that bubbly rush a goldfish displays is when it gets excited. I'm so happy to see you. You make our world so beautiful. That that might be the thought. And because in those worlds, the outward thought is seen by everybody else. By natural training and state, the outward thinking becomes calm, clear, and one is able to hold that core, a more centered thinking. See, the more deeper deliberations can be hidden from people, while the outward movement of thought is what traverses by telepathy usually. The deeper thinking, deeper senses can be depending upon own strengths. Alice Bailey, in one of her books, speaks of learning to shield. So one thing that happens is the state becomes as outwardly gentle but inwardly strong. Like you cannot keep an outwardly grumpy mind and inwardly, and as a result, inwardly weak state in those worlds, because everybody is going to see that. There are different worlds, parallel dimensions, uh, uh, higher dimensions, lower dimensions. When they speak of ghosts and those entities, those are actually existing entities. When they speak of angels, those are actually existing entities, only higher dimensional worlds. And in those worlds, they have life forms, education, buildings, their own technology, their own art, philosophy, all those things, their own worldview. Uh, some of the mythology, the description of Olympus, it is not to be dismissed as oh, just imagination. No, if it is just imagination, how come their art is so refined? How come their aesthetics is far higher than any civilization of today? They were an advanced people. They were not engaging fantasies. And this same agenda, that is, I got into this conversation because anyway, there are also parasitic alien species. There is a lot of exopolitic agenda on Earth, uh, because the world phenomenon and Earth's timelines are dependent upon timeline scan, which is the world DNA scan, and the world subpockets of the world DNA are scanned by the organisms of that world. A DNA editing vaccine agenda is usually to drive the world towards a timeline flip that benefits a species, a parasitic species usually, or to, as I were told, engineer their own kind. There is even form editing tech that can make parasitic aliens look like humans. If the editing has gone so much that the next fetus that appears is not entirely human, it can be hidden by that tech. Yeah, I was also told that the reptilian editing is so intricately done on Earth, almost into the Earth DNA, that there is a network of technology invisible to the human eye around Earth, hiding the. If you look at there comes out a lot of videos on YouTube showing the vertical eye slit appear in celebrities and all. Uh, that is because the eye is at the 0 point. When there is an extreme excitation event, anger, emotion, the awareness withdraws into a dimension which is beyond where this editing occurs. It can also happen when uh, the technology fails and it will automatically be replaced immediately uh, because of the network around and all those things. Um, and there's a lot of evidence. There is a video, very clear video, a few million views, and all the comments speak of what they are clearly seeing there. Uh, it is called the hissing reporter, a normal news presentation. What happens in the middle of it is their speech turns gibberish, their appearance starts altering, and finally they're hissing at each other. Uh, there is not even any talk because that human talk or maybe even human skill sets, all those things can be modeled just by adding another wave function layer. When I speak of skill sets, performance and all that, it might seem far-fetched, but remember now AI is making music that is virtually indistinguishable from a normal artist. The lyrics, the beats, the music itself, the singing, everything. And Earth AI is nothing. It is, again, these things, a lot of these things at the top sector are not being engineered by humans. It is being brought here in stages. Just a little bit of familiarity Earth will be given to AI, then highly trained AI systems are brought here. The people who themselves are slaves to these secret societies who are kept in on top places pretending to be CEOs running a dozen companies and all that, which is impossible, ridiculous. Uh, they themselves do not know that at the top, these cults are controlled by these alien species. They had the rituals which are taken over by these entities. They would appear in the middle of these rituals and pretend to give these people knowledge. And in the early phases, they might have even thought of those creatures as something. And when people get taken knowledge, the average people are greedy for everything. A little bit, but that tech is not real tech. Uh, and the tech a species being enslaved is being given is to enslave them. The mobile phones are said to have unique frequency IDs which can be used to open portals where a person is. The social media is used to collect energy signatures, which again can be used to open portals and study the thoughts. When people have good thoughts, the fields of Earth will itself will brighten up. And even social media opening of fields can be used to implant technology, devices, machines. Familial energies form walls against this. So those things are broken down. More human thoughts of a strong nature, those are displaced for the purpose of again enslaving humanity. If you had seen the kind of drama that transpired the past few years when they engineered a virus and then started the drama by digging up, by turning stadiums into mass graves, and it was vigorously fought. Uh, by turning stadiums into graves, it is obvious what their agenda was. And what spirituality is presented to be is part of the agenda of these races. It should be a whole function which involves science, everything. As for, I wanted to mention this, if you search the term, the lunar module, zoom in on those, on the lunar module on the moon. It looks like something that cannot withstand being dropped 1 feet from a height of 1 feet. It's entirely tin foil. The legs are made of tin foil. The panels on it are very clumsily put there. Uh, just a piece of tin covered in gold foil. Because the gold foil, people do not notice what it is. And they say in the 1960s they could land, but now we do not have the technology. The 1960s did not even have any powerful computers. So the satellites, of course, are there, but what I'm speaking is those manned missions to the moon. The lunar module, at least nobody can go there using that technology of what is shown as the lunar module. Just look at the picture. Don't take my word for it. Can you put a rover and three people in such a lunar module, make it land on the moon, and then uh, take off from the moon? No. The television exists for programming, which is why they call it TV programming. Sometimes they say what they do, which is part of their understanding of the world mechanics, because it's like taking acceptance from the victim for their ritual. They also have their evil ritual, spirituality, magic, and all, no matter what technology. While watching a television program, there might be simultaneously a layer of invisible technology scanning the fields of the person, AI modeling what this person is thinking. Is it a threat? Is he or she a threat to the agenda? People feel sometimes for no reason zapped of their energy when they try to do something good for the world. Because there are devices and machines actually zapping people. There is operant conditioning. When people attempt to engage some deeper thought, suddenly they might feel not so interested or literally zapped. And it is made operant conditioning in the sense of rats in cages can be conditioned by giving them rewards or zaps of electricity or whatever, a little shock. Um, so that is the way humanity is being enslaved. At this stage, I don't think anybody is pretending that uh, the world is going down this path of nothing but death by AI, and almost everything of depth being systematically destroyed by mere coincidence. It is being engineered into this path. Like during the COVID era, if you research, I am not saying this is a remedy or anything, but if you research high doses of vitamin D, and it was my experience too, immediately heals it. Like one dose, 70,000 IU with some uh, cream, because vitamin D is fat soluble. It immediately, almost virtually immediately makes it disappear. High doses of vitamin D were seen as curing tuberculosis even. But in the case of tuberculosis that had already set in, they had to give it for several months straight. That would result in other complications arising from too much calcium getting absorbed, fatal complications. But for a few days it is safe. Even for 1 or 2 weeks, I do not think personally, and I am not a doctor giving medical advice, it does, I do not think it does any damage. So anybody given vitamin D at the onset of COVID would immediately recover. The use of mass 6 feet distancing, everything was in the number six, a group of 6 people, 6 feet distancing. It is their agenda at play. The number involving six, which is the number of the so-called devil in uh, popular Christian belief. Uh, so that is what the agenda was at play. The masking is part of the ritual. Uh, the, do the masks help? Assume your lungs are infected and you put a mask over the infection. What will happen? The viruses, the bacteria, everything, and bacteria from secondary infections, everything will multiply at a very fast rate. Nobody will ask a person with infected lungs to avoid fresh air and keep the infected air inside. Only in the perhaps the very rarest of scenarios can a set of people uh, with with some kind of infectious disease is sneezing actively and you're walking through that space, then temporarily a mask can help, but the disadvantage is those particles would settle on the mask, multiply from there. A mask will filter things both ways. If something got into your lungs, it will filter it into you. But then masks were peddled as some kind of Panacea. They were literally making a mockery out of everything, asking people to wear masks inside home. People uh, being asked to wear a mask when they are physically in a date. Uh, and you saw how the programmed people were not questioning it even. Uh, in the event of such a symptom, the normal response of an individual is to go for fresh air. Go somewhere where there is fresh air. Do not quarantine yourself in a closed room. Go to the open terrace or wherever where there is fresh air, fresh sunlight. Get rid of the mask. Get extremely good nutrition, vitamin D high doses, other nutrition uh, in a in proper amounts, and it virtually disappears. Virtually nobody who were given vitamin D high doses had any complications. There were reports from the medical community arising saying that. When I speak of these parasitic aliens, there was a doctor who was saying on her medical account that I'm not a doctor and no expert on anatomy, but her post was saying, a video post was saying, um, the doctors were silenced on everything, silenced on speaking about the side effects of these things, silenced from speaking about um, the observed vaccination side effects. The media will cover things. So a lot of heart diseases uh, appeared after that. And then the media will run reports that COVID virus causes heart diseases, thereby covering it up. There might be nanotechnology and everything, all those things in the so-called vaccine. Uh, who were the experts peddling the vaccines? People belonging to the cult. Uh, and yeah, there was a Swedish study saying uh, this gets reverse transcripted into the DNA. The liver DNA had the vaccine RNA reverse transcripted into it when they studied it, and all those doctors were earlier on saying that doesn't happen. Um, that is, it gets into the DNA. It is DNA editing, DNA engineering. Uh, it is a proper study published on one of those major journals and on PubMed and all those places. You can just search it. Search liver DNA COVID vaccine RNA and you'll get it. And this particular doctor, she was saying um, that in the fetuses of those people, of fetuses, who, parents of that fetus being heavily vaccinated with multiple doses of vaccination, they were seeing parasitic growth structures. They do not know what it is, and they were obviously aborted. Um, what I was told is that there is an agenda to engineer those alien species into Earth, that the thing born will be the alien. I do not know the details of that agenda, but it is possible to use wave function editing and all that to mask what appears. There is a video of Elvis, if you just search it, that just one of the few videos of Elvis in interacting in a uh, interacting with no, a kid in that video, just a normal conversation, and suddenly, it is as if that entity's form appears to shift. Um, Others in the room try to stand between the camera and this individual. Almost the exact same patterns as the hissing reporter, the video that I said. There is another video in which Donald Trump is speaking something, and suddenly the entire room of reporters starts hissing. Those are not doctored videos. The world is a very complex place, um, and all different kinds of species exist. Um, and it has been the experience of civilizations across the world, across different eras. Individuals now, psychologists, if you ask them about the community of psychologists, if you ask them about the alien abduction phenomena, they'll say it seems legitimate because all of those people are very rational, educated people who are speaking of those experiences. Um, there was an alien landing phenomenon in they physically landed into this dimension in Earth and interacted with a group of 60 school children in an African nation. A Harvard psychologist went there, interviewed the kids, and he said those kids are not lying. Those kids drew the forms of those alien greys and said they interacted by telepathy um, and all that. Herman Nobel, who is described as one of the founding fathers of modern rocketry, when asked about their discoveries and all that said, they cannot take credit for their record breakthroughs in various fields because they have been helped. When he was asked by whom, he said by people from other worlds. The Pentagon recently issued a report, formal or informal, saying definitely they said that there might be motherships in the solar system. Actually, there are thousands of motherships in the solar system. Um, different worlds fell during that era. It is said we are going through a particular phase uh, with some rather intense transformations happening through the universe. Some have described a gravity wave that swept through worlds and only the elites are able to escape. Uh, there are uh, because it is not like it is hiding behind an asteroid or it is some weird asteroid-like object. Those are all attention diversions. It is in hyperspace. It won't be visible to the eye. Um, and there are civilizations on possibly on Earth itself that there were civilizations. And I'll just add a picture of an Antarctican UFO base. Uh, Antarctican or Arctican. I am not adding the coordinates, but that is from Google Earth. The next slide I'll add it. And this is a site on Earth. The question arises, to which civilization did this particular site belong? And how did they disappear? Was there an attack on Earth? Was there a timeline flip? Were there mud floods engineered as the proponents of a so-called Tartaria theory say? Search the word T-A-R, Tartaria, T-A-R-I-A, T-A-R-T-A-R-I-A, Tartaria. There's a Reddit forum on that. There's a documentary by the name Aether on Tartaria. I do not agree with everything they say, but there's a lot of substance, a lot of stuff to think about there. Of course, most people do not know about the idea of a timeline flip or anything like that, so they have to wonder where did they come from and where did they go? As in, these uh, civilizations, the structures, some of those architectural anomalies that we see. This is again another view. This is far from anywhere humanity has built anything. I'll add one more image. They say there are even sites on Earth where technology of previous Earth civilizations have been found, and even wars have been fought to gain access to those sites under the pretext of other things. Um, I do not know if that is that particular story is true or false, but it could be. What I know for sure is there are sites like this on Earth, like you see on this image of, and not just this particular one. There are sites that are not visible from the air, so to speak. So the reason why we got into a discussion of all that alien influence and all that jazz is to say that we have been programmed out of the idea that normal life, normal friendships, joys, games, all those things, the ritual of that, our own innate wish and desire to understand the world phenomenon, our tendency to research, um, the innate human curiosity that has led to the building of science, all those innate natural normal things, the normal ritual of life, is the spiritual ritual, is what they have completely deadened under the banner of becoming a professional, under the banner of having to do nothing but tinker an AI system at one end just to earn a living, and then they go ahead and glamorize that using the media, while the lives of those people are the dullest possible. And once that is glamorized, people will pretend that is some ideal way to live. And even the authentic possibilities of technology, the proper way to think about the world, uh, all those things have been hidden from us. And we've been given just the kind amount of technological knowledge working on which we can build our own cages. As in humans can build their own cages. People who understand it are not trapped by it. Um, the spiritual so-called thing is not different from the rituals of family, friendship, and anything of depth. If you even attending to a garden with a sense of depth is found in researches to heal the brain, as in the soul is holding a greater function. That is why the brain seems to heal. Uh, but this thing, along with those evil cults, have made it as if the purpose of action is somehow to uh, somehow only to build a bank account, and everything that we can have can only flow through the bankers. Um, and once the awareness thinks that is the reality, that is the only reality the awareness holds. And it becomes reality. For what is reality? It is, in the quantum physics sense, what the awareness is willing to observe, is observing. The awareness has its select the world vector will kind of, and it also has the ability, when evolved or so to speak spiritually advanced, to gain to higher orders of scan. Just like a UFO going from point A to point B is not traversing always on a straight line. It is exiting into hyperspace, re-entering into this space, which is why the speed seems like um, authentic papers published on uh, very accepted journals and platforms speak of these um, anomalous aerial phenomenon as having accelerations of 100G or even 1000G. That is not possible for any metal to withstand. So they wonder what kind of metal might it be using. And if there are any occupants, of course, they cannot withstand. What they are thinking is in terms of linear physics. It is exiting into a deeper space and then re-entering. And hyperspace, and it can enter into the almost the same time in a different spatial configuration. It is the ritual of friendship, family, normal life, and engaging things of depth, um, seeking deeper knowledge. The usual, it can be done through the usual study of books, People speak of discipline. There are 1,000 different books that um, discuss the topic of disciplined efforts. If that same book is read with the aspiration of achieving um, spiritual progress, so to speak, as in spiritual progress, you need a level of discipline for study or meditation or whatever. You might be just plain lazy, but with a level of discipline, as suggested by, say, the book Atomic Habits, you might decide to meditate for 1 minute a day, and that's a breakthrough. But when you read that book and your goal is to achieve that kind of progress, the act of doing that becomes an act of spiritual seeking. It is like just like searching an ancient library for wisdom. And that makes the soul break through. That makes the soul sense break through into the surface. And the surface awareness break through into the depths, whichever way you want to describe it. When you assume, alter your daily habits, you take away your habit of eating anything and bring in a habit of what might even be luxury foods, but that which keeps the spiritual energies strong, like by avoiding too much sugar, avoiding uh, um, things that are energetically damaging to the body, one of which is spices. In many places of the world, they've made spices a part of daily food, while their own ancient traditions say, like in India, traditions say you should not eat spices. What happens when you eat spices? The bodily energies are chaotized. A chaotized mind finds it more difficult to think. Not only just that, like the Zen poem said, the body is the eye. And it is like putting chili powder on your eye. It is not possible to feel, perceive, or see the depths, divine light. The yogic texts say avoid spices, pungent vegetables, they use the phrase. It's at least one of those texts. Um, you can search the Wikipedia article on that. While at a stage of the yogic effort. At a greater stage, the body can naturally alchemize whatever is put, but it is not normal to eat what is overtly harsh. That is not um, in alignment with any authentic culinary theory of any era. Good food, even in ancient Indian writings, involved butter, beef, like I said, wine. That is the exact same thing in the West. The West has uh, West continues to study those things and continue to study. It is altering everywhere the food habits. Those things should be, if they are given attention to with a view of the spiritual progress, strengthening of spiritual energies, which is non-different from strengthening of physical in the long run, which is non-different from taste, joys, and all that. If there is no taste, that means it is something um, not a form that is pleasant, not a form that is pleasant. If it is not a form that is pleasant, how can it have a pleasant impact on the body in the long run? Medicine is different. Medicines can only be had in very tiny amounts. Some people argue these spices have medicinal properties. You cannot eat ibuprofen or any medicine, aspirin, daily as food just because it has some positive properties. The very fact that it has medicinal properties means you should not eat it as food, and if you add it to food, it will destroy the vibrations of food, the formative vibrations of food. Um, and and you can sense it yourself. What is the nature of vibration of a pungent spice? It chaotizes things. It chaotizes perception itself. And yeah, this idea of an ideal food is therefore tasty. the Bhagavad Gita says tasty, nourishing, uh, snigdam. Snigdam means smooth, like cheese, butter, all those things. So because fats reduce the rate at which sugars are absorbed. So fat, if you have your vital energy in the body is strong, butter, those fats are really healthy, are healthy. Again, the advertisement industry till recent claimed butter is not good, but some processed form of fats are good. And now they've altered it. For decades, they maintained the opposite theory. What I meant to say this, the pursuit of what seems luxury, the ideal meal, an occasional 7 course dinner, all those things are pursuit of the spiritual ritual itself. So it becomes a very strong evolving point. Um, and in the action, there is, of course, in the family sense, there is different roles in the family. The academy has made it seem that everybody should do the same thing. If the polarity is destroyed, there cannot be any dynamism. So the different roles being, even in a ritual, is it that the king, the head priest, and everybody are supposed to be doing the same thing? Will the ritual happen? No. If the king, the soldier, and the poet, uh, the philosopher, everybody wanted to play the same role, will the kingdom ritual happen? It is not even for the individual because the ritual is impacting something beyond oneself. The king has to hold his frame so that the world benefits. No, nobody thinks good of a king uh, who does not hold the dignity of the position of the king, so to speak. Again, uh, the the ritual becomes the force that transforms it. The same ritual is there in when they build governments, everything. They have to have those buildings, and the processes have to be shielded. So that is the way the world functions. The ritual purifies the self, so to speak, and also uh, takes to a grander inner view. People have taken to monastic endeavors and solitary endeavors when uh, everybody else lost the view. The Mahabharata says family is the highest form of hermitage, domesticity, grihasthashrama. That is why the Pandavas, um, like Yudhishthira, wanted to go back to the forest after the war, seeing all the destruction and all that, and thinking also that would be ideal for the spiritual progress. And he is advised by all the sages and everybody saying no, he has to engage the spiritual ritual, which is the kingdom royalty ritual. And in those sections as well, it is said domesticity is the highest path. Domesticity fails to be a path when the greed focus just somehow making some money uh, is the ultimate purpose, and home is the place where you can display the worst side of your personality. It is the opposite. The home is the place for the sacred effort. Public is a place where you can be a little more outgoing. So, like we just saw, even in the final stages of meditation, things of world and joys are recommended in the Gita. The issue is only when, um, assume one person wants to drive to the mountaintop, another to a vanity show. They cannot uh, drive the car or guide the car in a particular direction. So, when the meaning of the family ritual is lost, it becomes some kind of a competition for supremacy and those kinds of ideas that are peddled on media uh, and the joys disappear. Everything becomes just the surface moment. So the joys fizzle out immediately. People, if one person is so stuck up in the head, arrogant, in a space, assume a family space or any space, it will destroy the soulful feeling of the whole space. So when false theories are programmed into anybody's brains, that the quality of that environment drops. That is how they make the quality of the world environment drop, and for the purpose of holding less than ideal timelines, less than ideal for humans, good for them, good for the parasites, parasitic aliens. There are aliens who say that we are living in a post-apocalyptic world in the sense of war was lost. When a timeline flip occurs, um, a lot of things change. In the sense, nothing will be there as if there is, as if without any vague, at least a vague reason for it to be there. A lot of people do not have the memory of the capital of Brazil being a place called Brasilia. If you search it, it's Brasilia. People do not have the memory uh, because they have a memory of a different timeline. In the movie, uh, in the scary, no, not in the movie I Saw What You Did Last Summer, the contestants are asked what, um, no, which place is the capital of Brazil? And they answer Rio de Janeiro. They win the prize. And later on in the movie, it says they won the prize because they gave the wrong answer, and the capital, because the capital is Brasilia. This is possibly a timeline flip artifact. Nobody will make a movie with such a dumb story. Winning for a dumb answer, and that was the trap. It does not even sound like an educated story. But the timeline flip cannot displace the movie as such, but the vision has to alter. Uh, and some people have not heard of the Mexican Wars of Independence or the Imperial Coat of Arms of Brazil. You can search, all of that exists now. Of course, some will have it as part of their memory view, which again is a view of a set of DNA vectors. While those set of vectors have not been entirely displaced in the DNA spaces of other people. So different uh, memories of what was the past of this particular Earth appears. And if you look at all those colonial invasions and all, it is not even logical that 100 Mexican soldiers could displace the 1 million strong army or 1 million uh, large whatever in South America and all that. Even their own legends are official versions of what they have written are like they abducted the king and all that. That is just fantasy. If they abducted the South American king to conquer Mexico, a few people who are out there saying that after the king died, were they murdered? No. They say the public killed the king. Uh, the grave of the king has not been found. So what we might be seeing as remnants of that civilization might be a timeline flipped view of an advanced civilization that was there. Um, yeah, and as I have said, throughout the world, there is evidence of architecture belonging to a more advanced civilization. The most beautiful architecture, some of the most beautiful architecture we have were built before Newton discovered his laws. Taj Mahal. Why is it that we cannot imitate the Taj Mahal? The Taj Mahal does not have a foundation. Um, I'll add a slide on that. It is something interesting. Found, I'll explain it on that slide. When the purpose of the action is uh, aligned with the spiritual endeavor sense, then the form of family, kingdom, life, all those things is the form of the spiritual endeavor. So the lyrics to this song says, "I can only stay clean when you are around," because in the soul sense, the world is getting pushed out, and when the awareness of the depths is strong, the soul principle is acting in the world. Superficiality, when people just run after an empty ritual of life or an empty, um, just a surface idea of love, as we see now in this dating culture, that surface idea has been imposed as if it were a fight between who is stronger, uh, and destroying the very idea of uh, differences, profundity, everything needed for the uh, a deeper idea of uh, love between humans to exist. And they destroyed using the materialistic ideas, they destroyed using the false spiritual ideas. That is what I wanted to point out. The form of life and of family. The family rituals start with the sacred rituals in the sacred places, church, or temples, or wherever, or the sacred rituals. Um, because they were designed to alchemize the spiritual endeavor. This is not just a few people coming together because, or a husband and a wife coming together because that will make their daily work and the trade and going to daily work and returning all the stuff easier. No, that was not the idea. The whole idea was because it existed before trade existed. It was designed to alchemize and strengthen the spiritual endeavor. The education of today obfuscates the idea by teaching a narrow view. The idea of growth across dimensions and spiritual growth, and those things are not the stuff of education as of now. And thus it is thought uneducated to be dealing with any of that. Spirituality as a label is put on everything dull and lifeless. And everything of life is supposed to be in the domain of what the ads advertise. Life is a whole function, and the kingdom, riches, and prosperity evolve from the spiritual growth principle. The spiritual growth principle in the inverse direction, the royal ritual were designed to sustain. And the royal ritual appears as a natural function of spiritual growth, as in the rituals of the riches of the royalty even. Family, the family ordering being the exact same idea. Um, the Chinese text, the Great Learning, says one has to start from the self, family, and then evolve the world. It has to start, the individual cannot hope to transform what is not his own roots. It is like pouring water somewhere else, like pouring water on the leaves of a plant. The same way, the evolution, growth, joys, these things evolve where one stands. And nobody is born devoid of a family and things like that. The present agenda is targeted at everything. It makes it seem that all the joys are in some kind of rewards gotten from empty work and that people have to do uh, to gain something from the bankers to make a living, like what I just said, building AI, genetic editing, uh, now pushing AI into a state where it controls humankind. AI can play a positive role if the human wisdom designs and uses it in such a way. It can, for instance, bring ease to research, for instance, bring ease to uh, daily repetitive endeavors, providing more time for studies, inner growth. But a whole function of education should be there even for people to perceive those possibilities. In the Mahabharata, the god Indra says even the forms that we see among wild animals are in an aspect because if you see the bulls live familial lives. There is an ordering, there is a head to the clan of wolves. It's again just the Vedic ritual of kingdom. The, the formalism of the ritual is only intensifying it and can hold it in place. What the earlier Dao-De-Jing quote warned against is falling into the husk of the ritual. That occurs when people forget there is something deeper to be striven for, yet out of all worldly fears, for more financial gain, in fear of financial losses, career losses, they continue to engage the husk of the ritual. And in that process, it alchemizes their own destruction. Because they are not acting from the soul plane. They're using the ritual to serve their greed. Even their prayers are usually fears and greed. The original sense of the ritual were designed to amplify the natural sense of the soul. Um, Schiller says art imitates nature, and by art, the human transcends nature. Forms of existence of structured society, family, involves that art. That art is the very same art by which the state of yoga is approached through worldly action. And meditation is also a meditation study. These are all, of course, strong forms of action. When one eases, that is a form of action. The Bhagavad Gita says uh, the person who sees inaction as action and action as inaction, such a person sees yeah, the way things are. If you've seen the Tao symbol, one has an element of the other has an element of the other. This is the fifth sutra in the Yoga Sutra text. It says, Vrittayaha, Panchatayaha, Klishta Klishtaha. It means, Vrittayaha means the cycles, the types of world DNA scan. Panchatayaha means out of 5 types. Klishta means that which has a sense of suffering associated with it. Aklishta is the opposite of that which has a sense of pleasure associated with it. So, in effect, it says the perception of world cycle scans are of 5 types, or the world cycle scans are of 5 types, and each of those 5 types can be of the nature of suffering or of pleasure. As one progresses in deepening one's perception, it is possibly beneficial to identify these vrittis for what they are. But in terms of practically living the path, engaging the form of existence, which of course um, is both necessary and something that cannot be avoided, because the entity is still existing in the world. Whether they, even by just glancing at the wall, one is existing, one is engaging one of those vrittis. So it is not about disengaging from these vrittis entirely. For one, that is not possible. That would, in the literal sense, mean you exited from the matrix. Mm, The outer world scan cannot be stilled. The moon will keep spinning. The sun will keep rising. And the earth will keep turning. But this process, even early on, involves understanding what the vrittis are and also engaging the world phenomenon in a way such that there is progress on the path, that the awareness gets deepened, even in the worldly sense. One has to go to work to, usually, for many people, they have to go to work to get what they need to live. So even in the greater reality sense, people have to engage the right kind of action so that uh, they can have the virtue, have the resources in the spiritual sense as well. Because actions are seen to have their consequences. Um, and the ritual itself, ritual of life, is not nihilistic. There is a sacredness to it. What one does matter. It is those who have done the right things, those who spontaneously, in the Tao sense, tend to do the soulful right action, whose thoughts are not narrow or stuck in um, some overtly uh, narrow cycle. It is those who, it is those people who tend to discover things. There have been efforts by the alchemists to hide their doctrine. So, in one of those alchemical texts, I think it is the Golden Tract, the particular alchemist who is writing it anonymously, I think. It is the Golden Tract, I think. Anyway, that particular alchemist says um, the Golden Tract, or I think that was what it is, the glory of the world. Anyway, that particular text says whenever he has attempted to explain this to people, the alchemical path to people, even when he took every effort to bluntly describe every word, there was nothing understood by the other person. It is not an absence of intelligence. The person could have an IQ of 150 or 200 or 400 and still not get it. And he therefore says, whatever that artist can only be received freely as a gift from God. So he recommends piousness and all those Christian virtues. Strength is also a virtue. So what I was talking about is that it is not about avoiding these five types of vrittis, but about engaging the world in the sense it is to be engaged. This is often the topic of various ancient traditions. How the world is to be engaged. There is evidence that the Yoga Sutras themselves are not about just avoiding the world phenomenon. For instance, sleep is described as one of these vrittis. At the same time, the study of the dream phenomenon, when the dream phenomenon is profoundly understood, the world dynamics is also understood. And therefore, the study of the dream phenomenon can lead to the freeing of the awareness. The Buddhists often use the analogy of the world being, even the Indian text, the world is a dream of Brahma. But at the same time, the Nagarjuna in his treatise points out what one does in the dream also affects oneself. So one cannot get into an idea of totally everything is nihilistic, imaginary. No, that is not what is meant. Something is imaginary means um, there will not be a world physics. There will not be any pattern. That is not what is said. What is said is more along the lines that there is a mathematical pattern. There is a machine or a world system from which this pattern arises. And the awareness is wielding that machine in its own DNA pocket, or the awareness in the world system in its own DNA pocket is scanning the DNA vectors, scanning out own DNA vectors, perceiving the world DNA vectors. But to animate this world machine, there needs to be awarenesses on different planes. The sun has to have an awareness of its own. When they speak of the being in the eye of the sun, the being in the eye of the moon, and so on, they are not referring to that particular individual awareness of the sun or of the moon. Those are two different entities, as far as I understand. And the Upanishads, like the Shveta Ashvatara Upanishad, the beginning itself says there are two, one is strong and one is weak. And there are traditions that resort to that higher being. It is not a higher being to that which is higher being can be a god of any plane, and then there might be a plane above that. Within this uh, layered machine, this layered DNA scanning structure, world DNA scanning structure, what the what that refers to is the inexpressible one of the Gnostic treatise, the Apocryphon of John. An idea analogous to the idea of Plotinus when he attempts to describe the one. And of course, the very title of the poem being the inexpressible one, we are not going to assume the definitions of Plotinus are absolutely on the point. But again, what he was, uh, the idea he was driving at in his philosophy. When you view something, when you try to understand the world, when you engage the appeared mathematics of the world, like Euclidean geometry, starting with a set of axioms that follow from observation, then one is again engaging the world cycles. One is not dealing with an absolute view of the machine core itself and its mathematics. One is dealing with, again, the viewed patterns, one of the vrittis. But again, engaging that, trying to, the sense when one engages, say, absolute the study of, in the sense when one engages the study of Euclidean geometry, there is a strong sense of aesthetic that evolves inside. It has even been described as a spiritual endeavor by some. Einstein described it as the holy book. because it gives forth through that aesthetic a holy feeling, and that holy feeling is from the plane that is sought, from the beyond that is sought, from the beyond the world machine that is from the beyond the world machine that is sought in the process. Therefore, there is a so-called anchoring of the soul to those planes. We might say anchoring, but there is no real anchor being dropped. It is the awareness that is understanding and therefore identifying with not the vrittis, more along the lines of where it is situate. Swarupa, tada drashtuhu, swarupe avasthanam. Avasthanam means, ava means downward, sthan is like the English stand. Again, avasthanam has the sense of an anchored standing. So again, we see that the avoiding the vrittis in that sense would mean I see the Euclidean text, oh, this is all about vrittis, I'll just keep it outside and try to avoid the vritti. That is not what one does. One engages the study of it and thereby evolves. There is an enrichment to the soul that is done in the study. And when that enrichment happens, when that ordering is vibed with, it even manifests in the ordering, the geometry, the aesthetics of the physical form. Not to mention the aesthetics of the brain, the mind. A study of Euclid, when it is done in a profound meditative sense, leads to a state where the mathematical proofs one comes up with, or one's own mathematical view, tends to have that elegance. One's own arguments tend to have that elegance. There was Abraham Lincoln or somebody who, after failing in life, so to speak, sat down and studied Euclid, one of the few. I am not sure if all those books, a few books of Euclid. I am not a big fan of these personalities that I mentioned. We do not know the authentic history. Who are these people, or whether they were installed there in this world drama. I am a bit of skeptic on the things they put on stage. But the idea is that engaging profound systems of thought leads to a state of deepened awareness, profundity, which is the lighter definition of yoga we had. And the deepened awareness tends to see the world and the soul for what they are, and thus is dragging oneself into a state of yoga by the reason that appears. Nobody can ignore what is of reason, logic. With all the safety precautions from the previous slides, we are going to progress to the next sutra, and that sutra is a listing of the 5 different types of vrittis, the 5 different types of world DNA scans. I say safety guidelines because I do not want anybody developing an opinion that yoga is a state of dullness. Yoga is a state from which you removed yourself from the norm. What is just the norm of world activity? If you want to sit and study the ancient texts and that is joyous to you, that is a norm that has appeared. That's a normal thing that has appeared inside. If you want to spend time studying Euclid, that is a normal thing. And if that is the push that appears from within, that is the only thing that you can do and be at ease. And speaking of the pleasure and pain, the Yogasutras say the vrittis are off. This particular phrase of what pleasure, what pain, appears often in Goethe's writings. Every instant of the world, every instant of world transformation seems to have that quality. But this is different from the soul pleasure. What is being talked about are the what is being talked about are the pleasure and the pain sensations that arise from the identification with the vrittis. Usual world experience involves both. When I have a good chocolate drink and it feels good, the pleasure is of course on the soul plane. Being lost in the vrittis means if I'm entirely identified with this phenomenon of the chocolate drink and I am thinking that is the where the pleasure itself appears, of course it is an identification with the vritti. Then one might get into the suffering psychosis that without the chocolate drink I cannot do well in life. When that phenomenon alters to another state, when the chocolate drink is over and it is not available now, the sense of suffering can arise. Again, it is from identification with the vrittis, the altering DNA scans. I hope you understand that there is a difference in it from this pure sense of soul pleasure. But again, I'll take the example of an incense burned in a Zen monastery. Of course, it's sensorial pleasure. It is from the world scan, but it is also amplifying the soul pleasure, the meditative states. They also do it because there are different dimensions, reality is layered, and that particular substance can invite more high vibration entities, if I'm allowed to use that phrase. And also that substance possibly goes into the formation of the body itself because it is the subliming substance. It might have a good impact on the mind, on health. It might be well researched and from herbs designed to serve that purpose. It might cleanse own field. Okay, I think that is enough for this particular slide. And remember, this is just one kind of classification. The 5 types the Yogasutras speak of, there are other possible classifications based on the deeper dynamics of the world machine itself, which I won't be getting into at the moment. Like in analyzing what dreams are, one might possibly be led into questions such as what are the layers of scan in the world machine? How does the DNA machine present the code that appears as a pure dream state? What animates the non-player characters in a dream? And my approach to understanding these topics is the same as approaching any field, say geometry or anything. It has to involve analysis. It has to involve research data from the world, analysis in the deeper sense as well. I haven't thought deeply about the dream process, though I have had some experience with the so-called a very short phase of time. I had a bit of experience when I was reading a book on that, of entering dream states that virtually appear the same as reality. And then you're not as if waking up from a dream. One goes into sleep, enters this lucid dreaming world. It is in no way, almost in no way different from this world. And then as if coming across a bubble back into this world, um, one returns from the dream, wakes up from the dream, so to speak. But again, it is not like a sudden waking up from the dream state feeling, because you never slept. And it is not tiring either. I have not trained myself to do that, but I was reading a particular book on that. Possibly the systems and the energies are associated with uh, those writings. When those topics get discussed, one is vibing with those systems. These dream yoga practices are found in different traditions across the world. I won't get into a lot of detail at the moment, but I'll try to address the topic in a slight bit of greater depth when we reach the sutras dealing with the dream. For slight bit of greater depth, because what I just spoke about is virtually all the experience that I have on it, and therefore there is not a lot more that um, I think I can discuss about it at this particular point. Perhaps more ideas will turn up on thinking about it on a bit further research. Dreams can be different things. It can be symbolic messages, it can be experiences. In certain cases, I'm not saying every dream, a few dreams might be parallel dimensions, memories associated with experiences in parallel dimensions. Some people wake up from abduction experiences and all, thinking it is a dream, and then they find there are physical marks on the body. So it can be memories formed in a physical reality. I said I would discuss something about the touch, that it virtually stands on a platform and without a foundation, and some things about its architecture and more. But remember, we cannot imitate that level of finesse even today. But that is not what I wanted to point out. But I thought that's too far. That takes too far from the topic of these slides. But in the previous slide, I spoke about so-called abduction experiences. This was a prank played on me by a few of my alien friends. So these UFOs exist in hyperspace. It can overlap with the space where one is in another dimension. It won't be visible to the naked eye and so on. So I wake up from this particular dream, um, and there was no ink in the room. I searched over and over again. There was no ink bottle, no blue pen, nothing. And I wake up with this particular writing on my palm. In fact, I wake up with a blotch of ink on my palm. That was absurd because there was no ink in the room. And obviously, what I do is I wonder what it is, and then I go and try to wash it. When I wash it, this particular writing appears. Okay, that might be anything. Because I got curious, I took a few snaps of it. If you look at the uh, portion that I encircle over here, that is a mirror image of what is here. On the left and right are two different snaps. This is not a feature that appeared in just one snap. The bedsheet does not have all these patterns. It is not a mirror image of this strange marking on my hand. There is no such bedsheet in the entire world. It is just a simple floral design on the bedsheet. Here it is even more obvious. Um, you would have to watch a little closely the M markings, as if to say MOLY. It was a prank by my friends because I have what they describe as a memory phaser. So I will not have the entire set of memories of that side. How this is done, this is not writing on my palm. If you look closely, these alphabets are not written with pen, but it is as if the ink got deposited on lines on my palm in the shape of those alphabets. I do not have those lines on my palm. Uh, so how this is done is, first I have to give you a dream in which somehow ink or something deposited on your hand. That'll make the awareness susceptible to what follows. It is an external device that is altering the brain wave function. When that the high order brain wave function is altered, the form alters. The outer world is the higher order brain wave. By brain, I refer to the n-dimensional structure, a collapsed view of which is the human brain. And you can find any other way, if you can, to explain this, the mirror image forming on the bed. And this is not my handwriting either. I know exactly whose. It's a girl's, and she's part of the crew. Uh, they age in different ways because they can literally replace their body, can take the body into youthful, very young state. That, in the sense, some civilizations they'll stay in that um, age of like between school and college, uh, that age for a long time. Of course, finally, when the phenomenon alters in the higher dimensional sense, the body has to be abandoned. When I spoke about the wave function being the form, that is what quantum physics says. Now, it is the observer collapsing the wave function that becomes the particle form. Without the observer, there is no particle. So if you just Google, you'll find articles saying, does the universe exist when we are not observing? Questions along the lines. Of course, the higher dimensional realities do exist. And for it to be projected onto another layer, an awareness has to hold the projected collapsed vector states. What I just said takes away the mystery of what the Schrodinger's equation is. It is not a very accurate formulation. To arrive at the accurate formulation, we need a different kind of view starting from mathematics. Starting from actually the very foundations of mathematics. And that is my major activity at the moment. I'm not actively working on it, but I am taking myself through the discovery process. That's why I talk about a physics that is not in this world. Another civilization, they wanted to tell me how this uh, hyperspace crafts work. So I was having a conversation with them, and I obviously, and I want to know what is their view on things. And I ask, what have you ever tried crashing a UFO into the center of a black hole? Have you ever crashed a UFO into a black hole? They did not understand the question. Uh, Crashing a UFO into the black hole, because when we speak about black holes, the notion is you take a space shuttle, go right near the UFO, and then it all crumbles into pieces. Perhaps the camera can give a little bit of feedback on what was seen. So she doesn't understand the thing. When I explain a bit more, she says, what happens is communication can occur by telepathy, like I said in one of those earlier lectures. That is what is norm in different worlds. So she says, it can also occur using devices. Thought can be directly translated to text, and so on. Anyway, then she says, near a black hole is a very gentle entry into hyperspace. Okay, so then I tell that might be because of the propulsion. She does not understand the word propulsion. What I meant was, she refers to Wikipedia and then says, Wikipedia reminds me of retro sci-fi. What I meant was, it might be a singularity based drive. So it warps space-time around it, to speak in terms of Earth physics. Um, and therefore, when it approaches near a black hole, the space-time curvature adds up and it blips into hyperspace. And another conversation um, with the father of a girl from another alien civilization. There are hyperspace stations in our solar system, different ones, different worlds. Usually those are a lot of them that appeared in recent phases were the aristocracy of those worlds that uh, just like Air Force One would be asked to leave if a disaster happens. They do not have an option usually. They'll be asked to board those ships. And anyway, um, the previous uh, anyway, during the discussion, um, the idea turned up that the black of entering black holes near galaxies, and it was spoken of as related to discovering other galaxies. Because once the hyperspace is entered, different configurations of the same hyperspace system that was exited from in time would be seen. In that sense, one might think of the galaxies as scans somehow separated in time of the same data system, which itself transforms. Of course, as the scan is done, certain vectors are held, certain vectors are absorbed. There is a way of describing it. The Nazis were speaking of during the Nuremberg trials. They said Donitz. I think that is the way that name is pronounced. Donitz was saying that they had made a fortress in the middle of eternal ice for the Führer. Hitler's skull was never found. Recently, they found anatomically it was the skull of a woman and not Adolf Hitler's. A lot of the Nazi submarines were missing. The Nazis had a UFO project. They had that mercury-based drive. So they were entering hyperspace at the South Pole. A particle's North Pole and South Pole are distinct in physics. Today's particles physics speaks of a particle ejecting particles at the South Pole of it. But that is not the idea. There is a hyperbundled set of worlds. And once one enters the hyperspace axis with a UFO drive, with a UFO, it is possible to enter other worlds. Which is why the Antarctic area has a lot of UFO phenomena spoken of by different people as well. Those are different Earths and different world civilizations, different worlds and different civilizations. Some worlds can be very different to ours. It can even be oceanic and so on. There are other planets with oceanic worlds. There are other galaxies because for a planetary system to process its DNA, there needs to be awareness points, whether visible or invisible beings, whether in a dimension or another. On that, a planet might look barren on a dimension, it might have life in another dimension. Dimensions in the sense of parallel dimensions, of the same order of zero, but parallel dimensions. Something else I wanted to say about this phenomenon of different. Yeah, there is in ancient Indian writings we find the concept of a world axis, Mount Meru, and there are different worlds on this world axis. The same appears in Norse mythology. That world axis is just what I spoke of, and those different worlds are not accessed by climbing or drilling down the earth, drilling into the earth, or anything of the sort. It is accessed by entering hyperspace. If one were to enter hyperspace, if the human awareness were to exit, assume at this point, and enter hyperspace, what would be seen is the particular form in different configurations. And theoretically, it is possible to enter one of those configurations and shift the timelines a bit into the timeline of own experience into that particular quantum altered reality. That physics is what the UFOs use. When they appear from one position and attempt to immediately appear at another position as if needing like 1,000 Gs or 100 Gs of acceleration to do that. They're not accelerating. Yeah, the thing that what I started with. So when I started wanting to figure this physics out, I wanted to do this myself. Like Herman Oberth was saying, we cannot take credit for our discoveries because we have been helped. So I did not allow them to explain anything to me. So one of the kids in one of those civilizations started reading from her book to me on how this time or these crafts that enter hyperspace works. So she said this much charges rotated at 95% speed of light, and then I did not allow her to talk more than that. Um, I understand in an increasingly clear sense, and therefore in lesser and less vague sense, why rotation of those charge vectors would have the awareness center hyperspace. It is not four-dimensional reality as it's itself entered. It is that particular plane of the four-dimensional zero, the awareness situated where would see the hyper-bundled three-dimensional worlds on that four-dimensional zero. The perception of reality is still three-dimensional. One is seeing those worlds, and the movement through those worlds are revealing different three-dimensional configurations. And it is not continuous. It is as if there are nodes between what looks like clouds made of strings in a particular kind of view. So those are not literally clouds. It has to do with the way awareness processes things. There is a mathematical node formation process, like just as in modern quantum physics, there can be points at which the wave function turns up a zero probability or lesser probability, higher probability, or zero probability tending to zero probabilities, and so on. But what I'm speaking of is not the modern notion of mathematics precisely, because what they understand is not that mathematically accurate. In the next lecture, I will discuss what I describe as the dynamic observer state. And after that, perhaps in the lecture afterwards, we'll get into the discussion of these 5 different types of vrittis. It might need more than one lecture to do that. We will try to explore how these 5 different types of vrittis can be leveraged, how engaging these vrittis rather than just disassociating from them can be leveraged to make progress on the path of yoga.